Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Jessica Zivotowski and I am a training specialist as well as a current graduate student in our Learning, Design, and Technology program at the University of Colorado, Denver. And today we will be talking about CARP principles. Now I do like to keep my webinars as interactive as possible, so please take note of some of those meeting controls. If you've joined in via Zoom, you can always mute or unmute your audio. You're also welcome to start or stop any video sharing. If you're uncomfortable verbally asking questions, feel free to use our chat tool. You can also send reactions throughout today's session through our participants feature. At the very top of your screen, you'll see something like, "You are currently viewing Jessica Zivotowski's screen." You should also see an option for more. Under that more option, there will be the ability to annotate, and we will be using those annotation tools throughout today's session. So here's our agenda set aside for today. We'll be talking about CARP and defining the why in terms of why CARP is important. We'll then break down each element of CARP, which includes contrast, alignment, repetition, proximity, and then we'll go into our Q&A and we'll wrap it up. So CARP does stand for contrast, alignment, repetition, and proximity. And it is a tool that instructional designers and facilitators can use to design engaging and thoughtful presentation. So let's talk about why it's important. Using the raise your hand feature, which you should see in your poll, or I'm sorry, in your participants feature, please raise your hand if you've ever been distracted by a presentation's design. Okay, it looks like a few of us were able to raise our hand. And do I have a volunteer who would like to unmute their audio and just share an example of that?
I guess I'll go. This is Monica.
Thanks, Monica.
Hi. Yeah, I think sometimes less is more. And there's this acronym from long ago. It was kind of KISS, keep it simple, stupid. It's kind of not the nicest thing. But, thinking about just the use of maybe 3 colors, you have and I just want to remark that so far the graphics I've seen, you have a really nice, clear, clean layout. Sometimes there's too much graphics, too much going on, and you get lost. Focus on what the actual message is. So I've seen that. I think sometimes people get, maybe it's the gamers that use too much.
Yeah, really into graphics.
Yeah, a little bit too much flash. So I have seen that, and I'm trying to be careful in designing my own webinar with my slides to make sure less is more.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Monica. And I would definitely agree. I think many times people kind of go overboard in their design. And I am a fan of simple design. And I have sat through quite a few presentations, especially after learning about CARP principles, where I have been more distracted by what I'm looking at. And I can't listen to what's actually being said. So it's really important when you design your materials that you keep that in mind, that people are not only listening to what you're saying, but they're also viewing what you're showing. So we're first going to start out by talking about contrast. Contrast is the first element of CARP, and contrast really shows us what we should be looking at. So looking at my screen here, and using your annotation tools, go ahead and circle or check mark what you think I'll be talking about. So if you have not yet found that annotation tool, it should be at the very top. Okay, we're thinking maybe the brain. And feel free to also send those through the chat if you have not yet found that annotation tool, but it should be at the very top of your screen. Okay, contrast. So some of us are looking at my title. We see that the title says contrast, so we're thinking, okay, that's what we're going to be talking about. Some of us circled, it looks like maybe our brain. And looking at my image, you actually can't tell what I'm going to talk about. And so if I switch my image here, you can tell now that I'll be talking about oranges. And you know I'll be talking about oranges because my orange stands out. Because our brain naturally looks for those differences, I'm now focused on the orange. However, you have to be careful with contrast. So look at my slide now. Well, I have a lot of contrast. My orange is orange and I have a pear that's colorful and a red apple. And I still have my brain, and it seems now like everything is in contrast to everything else. So you have to strategically use contrast when you design your slides. It'll help you pinpoint what you're looking at. Now let's move on to alignment. I like to think of alignment as kind of an invisible grid. So everything should line up horizontally and vertically. And using your annotation tools, why don't you show me which person is not correctly aligned with the others? Oh, Joni, thanks for using that arrow. Yes, great. So we are now looking at my 8th person here. He's not aligned with everyone else. And when I look at this slide, I'm more distracted by that. I might be thinking, is that intentional? Is there a reason my 8th person is higher? Is that a mistake? Did the designer just not see that? Did someone accidentally move it? And I'm so distracted by my alignment that I might miss a statistic like only 1 in 10 individuals actually eats their recommended amount of fruits and vegetables daily. And so now I have my correct alignment. And now I'm actually focused on my contrast. The fact that one of my individuals is a different color than the other tells me that I should be focusing on that one individual. And so I might be more receptive to hearing that feedback and hearing that statistic. Repetition can mean a few different things, and that is our 3rd principle of CARP. I like to think of repetition as consistency. We could look at that as images. So some of you may have noticed that I've used similar icons. It might be a little weird if I threw a picture of a city or an actual photo. Repetition can be in fonts. It'd be weird if I had multiple different fonts going on, but it could also be the sizing of those fonts. Repetition could mean colors. So for example, I have a few bright colors here, pretty vibrant in many ways. But let's say I changed to this green images to pink. It wouldn't match with the rest. You'd be caught off guard by that. And you do have to be very careful with backgrounds. So although we like repetition, we like seeing consistent elements, sometimes if we see too much consistency, we actually drown out what we're looking at. Kind of that example of death by PowerPoint where everything matches. And the last principle of CARP is proximity. Proximity allows us to group items together through spacing. Looking at my image, you might say, oh, we're going to be talking about clothing. But I would encourage you to look a little bit deeper here. Again, using that annotation tool, or even our chat feature, if you'd like to unmute your audio, why don't you let me know which 2 elements are not in the correct places?
The shoes and the shirt. So the heel up at the top right, and then the blazer at the top, bottom right.
That is correct. So this heel doesn't quite look like it belongs there. And this blazer down here also doesn't look like it belongs. And although the items are similar, we can tell that we can arrange those differently. So look at my image now. You can clearly see that tops are at the top and shoes are at the bottom. And we can tell that tops are not the same as shoes and shoes are not the same as tops. And so we can utilize our proximity to group those items together. I did intentionally keep all of my icons black here just to further showcase the element of proximity. So looking at those 4 elements of CARP, contrast, alignment, repetition, and proximity, I would love for us to vote using those annotation tools or chat tool on which element you think is missed the most. Okay, we got contrast, repetition. Thank you, Art. Monica's also thinking repetition. So for those of us who think repetition, why are we thinking repetition?
Maybe too much information that somebody's trying to cover, so they forget to go back, and sometimes you want to have cover 3 topics as opposed to 6 topics. So I'm thinking in terms of repetition, of not being able to recap and having too much information and not covering back the main points.
Yeah. One thing about how many times someone might throw a presentation together and they change the font on one slide and not on the other, or the text is different, because again, they're trying to include too much information. What about contrast? Joni, I'm guessing that may have been you.
Yes, I think it may be sort of what was already described about sometimes pulling presentations together from different sources and then not paying attention to what color the text is on top of what color the background is. And I think that's also sort of reinforced by often using sort of set templates and themes that maybe reinforce some not great decision making around contrast.
Yes, I would agree. And thank you both for sharing. Anyone else want to share?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that for repetition, I would say it's really not having consistency across presentation slides, for example. And without that repetition of like the elements from the text to the graphics, that distracts the viewer.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. Thank you all for sharing your input. And again, there's really no right answer here. This is pretty opinionated, but because we view a lot of presentations, we are aware that sometimes these elements are missed. And though each element is important, they're very powerful when they're combined and used correctly. So I would like to open it up to see if we have any questions on our CARP principles, or if anybody would like to share anything else on any of the content that was discussed today.
Presentation was the market.
I'm hearing some audio cut potentially. I'm not sure who's speaking, maybe Monica. Well, thank you so much, Joni. I wanted to use our CARP principles when designing the presentation. So I do appreciate your comment through our chat. I would also like to provide you with some contact information. My name is Jessica Zivotowski, and you can always reach me at email here, my first name.last@gmail.com. And I do have a website where you'll see some additional examples of my work. But I would like to thank you all for your time and participation today, and thank you for using those annotation tools and unmuting your audio and conversing with me. I do hope that you learned a little bit more about our CARP principles. Thank you all so much for attending, and I hope you have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. This is awesome.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
This is the most of the Zoom tools I've used since Joni's.
That was my goal. I wanted to utilize some of those cool virtual tools.
Yeah,
I think a lot of times people are afraid of using those, so it's kind of fun to use them. Have a wonderful evening as well. Thank you so much for joining, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.